Hi, it's Miss Melissa from the Oosterhout Library. I miss the library so much that I've started to dress as my favorite book characters. But fortunately, we have the virtual library, a free app with thousands of books, the Cloud Library. Download it from the Oosterhout website or Facebook page. And the Harry Potter books are available. If you read Harry Potter, please let me know when you come back and tell me what you think. In the meantime, we will return to another Cloud Library book, The Absent Author, by Ron Roy, published by Random House. Our young detectives, Josh, Ruth Rose, and Dink, and the lady they just met, who's also worried, are trying to find the famous author Wallace Wallace, who didn't show up at his signing today and might be kidnapped. Back on Main Street, Josh adjusted his backpack and led the way to the Shangri-La Hotel. The taxi driver, Maureen, she dropped him off at the hotel last night, he told the others. So that's our next stop. What if she didn't, Josh said, catching up to Dink. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the driver wasn't telling the truth. Maybe she kidnapped him. And she's hiding him in her lunchbox, Ruth said. Ruth Rose, very funny, Josh said. Maureen told me she drove Wallace Wallace to the hotel. But what if she drove him someplace else? You could be right, Dink said. That's why we're going to the hotel. With Dink in the lead, the four approached the check-in counter of the hotel lobby. Excuse me, Dink said to the man behind the counter. May I help you? He was the saddest-looking man Dink had ever seen. He had thin black hair and droopy eyebrows. His skinny mustache looked like a sleeping centipede. The name tag on his suit coat said, Mr. Linkletter. We're looking for someone. Mr. Linkletter stared at Josh. He's supposed to be staying in this hotel. The man twitched his mustache at Josh. His name is Wallace Wallace, Dink explained. Can you tell us he checked in last night? Mr. Linkletter patted his mustache. Young sir, if I had such a guest, I would not give out such information. We have rules at the Shangri-La, he added in a deep, sad voice. But he's missing, Ruth Rose said. He was supposed to be at the book nook this morning and he never showed up. Dink pulled out the itinerary. See, he was coming here in the taxi. The taxi driver said she saw him walk into the lobby. And he's famous, Ruth Rose said. She placed her book on the counter in front of Mr. Linkletter. He wrote this. Signed, Mr. Linkletter looked down at Ruth Rose. We are quite aware of who Mr. Wallace is, young miss. Mr. Linkletter turned his sad eyes back on Dink. He flipped through the hotel register, glanced at it, and quickly shut the book. Yes, Mr. Wallace checked in, he said. He arrived at 8:05. He did? What happened after that? Mr. Linkletter pointed to a bank of elevators. He went to his room. We offered to carry his suitcase, but he preferred to do it himself. Have you seen Mr. Wallace today? Mavis asked. No, madam, I have not seen him. Mr. Wallace is still in his room. Still in his room? Suddenly, Dink felt relieved. He felt a little foolish, too. Wallace hadn't been kidnapped after all. He was probably in his room right now. Can you call him? Dink asked. Mr. Linkletter tapped his fingernails in the closed register. He patted his mustache and squinted at Dink. Please, Dink said, we just want to make sure he's okay. Finally, Mr. Linkletter turned around. He stepped a few feet away and picked up a telephone. As soon as his back was turned, Josh grabbed the hotel register. He quickly found yesterday's page. Dink and the others crowded around Josh for a peek. Dink immediately recognized Wallace Wallace's signature sprawled in big loopy letters. He had checked in room 303 at 5 after 8 last night. Dink pulled his letter from Wallace out and compared the two signatures. They were exactly the same. Josh dug his elbow into Dink's side. "Look," he whispered. Josh was pointing to the next line of the register. Room 302 had been printed there. Check-in time 8:15. "Someone checked in right after Wallace Wallace," Ruth Rose whispered. "But the signature is all smudged," Dink said. "I can't read the name." When Mr. Linkletter hung up the phone, Josh shoved the register away. As Mr. Linkletter turned back around, Dink shut the register. He looked up innocently. "See in his room?" Dink asked. "I don't know." Mr. Linkletter tapped his fingers. There was no answer. Dink's stomach dropped. His mind raced. If Wallace Wallace hadn't checked into his room last night, and he wasn't at the book nook today, why wasn't he answering his phone? Maybe Wallace Wallace had been kidnapped after all. Dink stared at Mr. Linkletter. "No answer? Are you sure?" Mr. Linkletter nodded. He looked puzzled. "Perhaps he's resting and does not want to be disturbed." "Can we go and see?" asked Ruth Rose politely. "Then we'll know for sure." Mr. Linkletter shook his head. "We cannot disturb our guest, young miss. We have rules at the Shangri-La. Now, good day, and thank you." Ruth Rose opened her mouth. "Good day," Mr. Linkletter said firmly again. Josh and the others walked towards the door. "Something smells fishy," muttered Dink. "Yeah," Josh said. "And I think it's that Linkletter guy. See how he tried to hide the register? Then he turned his back. Maybe he didn't even call room 303. Maybe he was warning his partners in crime." "What are you suggesting, Josh?" Mavis asked. "Maybe Mr. Linkletter's the kidnapper," Josh said. "He was the last one to see Wallace Wallace." A hotel employee wearing a red cap tapped Dink on the shoulder. "Excuse me, but I overheard you talking to my boss, Mr. Linkletter. Maybe I can help you find Wallace Wallace. My kids love his books." "Great," Dink said. "Can you get us into his room?" The man shook his head. "No, but I know the maid who cleaned the third-floor rooms this morning. Maybe she noticed something." With his back to Mr. Linkletter, the man scribbled a few words on a pad and handed the page to Dink. "Good luck," the man whispered and hurried away. "What did he write?" Josh said. "Go outside," Dink said. They all shoved through the revolving door. In front of the hotel, Dink looked at the piece of paper. "The maid's name is Olivia Nugget. She lives at Eggcorn's apartment number 4. "Livy Nugget? I know her," Ruth said. "She used to be my babysitter." "The Egghorn is right around the corner on Oak Street," Dink said. "Let's go." Soon all 4 of them were standing in front of Livy Nugget's door. She answered the door with a baby in her arms. Another little kid held onto her leg and stared at Dink and the others. He had peanut butter all over his face and in his hair. "Hi," the mother said. "I'm not buying cookies and I already get the newspaper." She was wearing a man's blue shirt and jeans. Her brown hair stuck out from underneath the Yankees baseball cap. "Livy, it's me, Ruth Rose." The woman stared. "Ruth Rose, you're so big. What are you up to these days?" "A man at the hotel gave us your name." "What man?" "He was sort of old, wearing a red cap," said Ruth Rose. Livy chuckled. "Freddie, old? He's only 30. Why did he send you to me?" "He told us you cleaned the rooms on the 3rd floor this morning," Dink said. "Did you clean room 303? Livy Nugget shifted the baby to her other arm and looked down at her son. "Randy, please stop pulling Mummy's leg. Why don't you go finish your lunch?" Randy ran back into the apartment. "No," Livy told Josh. "No one slept in that room. The bed was still made this morning. The towels were still clean and dry. I remember because there were 2 rooms in a row I didn't have to clean. 303 and 302. Room 302 had a Do Not Disturb sign hanging from the doorknob. So I came home early, paid off the babysitter, and made her lunches." But Mr. Linkletter told us Wallace Wallace checked into room 303 last night, Ruth Rose said. The Wallace Wallace? The mystery writer? My kids love his books, said the babysitter. Dink nodded. He was supposed to sign books at the book nook this morning, but he never showed up. We even saw his signature on the hotel register, Ruth Rose said. Well, Wallace Wallace might have signed in, Livy said, but he never slept in that room. Unless he's a ghost, she grinned. I wonder if Mr. Linkletter could have made a mistake about the room number, Mavis suggested quietly. Livy smiled at Mavis. You must not be from around here. Mr. Linkletter never makes mistakes. So Wallace Wallace signed in but didn't sleep in his room, said Dink. That means someone must have kidnapped him before he went to bed, Josh said. Livy's eyes bugged. Kidnapped? Geez, Mr. Linkletter will have a fit. She imitated his voice. We have rules about the Shangri-La. Everyone laughed, except Dink. All he could think of was Wallace Wallace, his famous author, kidnapped. Suddenly a crash came from inside the apartment. Oops, gotta run, Livy said. Randy is playing bulldozer with his sister's stroller again. I hope you find Wallace Wallace. My kid sister will die if he doesn't write another book. They walked slowly back to Main Street. Dink felt as though his brain was spinning around inside his head. Now he was certain Wallace Wallace had been kidnapped. But who did it? And where was Wallace Wallace being kept? Maybe we'll find out next time on the 5th installment of Book Bites from the Oosterhout Virtual Library.